on Lest We Forget today, we want to talk about yet another issue. Now, you remember that the voter registration exercise, the mass voter registration exercise rather, concluded a couple of days ago with slightly over 1 million voters who turned up to register as voters over that period of time. We'll have the numbers for you on the super wall in just a moment. So it was 1 million. Now, if you take a look at those numbers, based also, of course, on the fact that the IEBC had about 500 million shillings for that process. They had asked for 4 times that amount. That was about 2 billion Kenya shillings. Now, this is against a target of 4 million that IEBC had wanted to register. They did not meet that target. Now, we heard statements from both the President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition Raila Odinga. This was the first time in a long time they were agreeing on an issue, and that was on the fact that they both decried the low turnout to the voter registration exercise. Now, they also agreed on the reasons why. Now, they talked about voter apathy. The second they talked about was the lack of IDs. The third thing they talked about was the money that the commission had for this exact exercise. Now, take a look at this super wall and let's see some of the statements that were made regarding that specific issue of how much money is allocated to that. This is what Raila Odinga had to say. He talked about the fact that IEBC is mandated by law to carry out, note, continuous voter registration in constituencies, and he said it should be financed well to be able to discharge this function effectively and efficiently. The IEBC itself also decried the issue of the funds that it is receiving, talking about the low voter turnout being due to voter apathy as well as a lack of resources for them to spread this exercise out to the rural areas. The president himself also made a statement on this. This is the promise he made just last week in regards to the issue of money for voter registration. Listen to this.
Watu wasiseme hawana makaratasi, hawana nini. Sisi serikali yetu itawatafutia pesa hawa watu ya IEBC, warudi waandikishe watu kura na wachukue kura, watu waweza kupiga kura. Hiyo ni haki ya kila Mkenya, na tutahakikisha tunawatafutia.
All right, now, lest we forget, it is not per se the executive that will give money to the IEBC for this exercise. It is, in fact, the National Assembly whose role it is to do so. And lest we forget, the National Assembly allocated the IEBC just 500 million shillings, a quarter of the budget. Also, lest we forget, for the president's statement that he has just made to be relevant, he has got to be able to put this in the supplementary budget as the fiscal year is almost over. So these are the things that we have to remember tonight. Let's also remind you that it was the same National Assembly that passed that budget. They had asked for 2 billion shillings, like we told you. But here's another thing that we need to remember tonight, that both the President and Raila Odinga have the power to whip their members of National Assembly to go into Parliament and vote to give IEBC the money it requires. Now, let's talk about something else in regards to money that we find particularly interesting. At the same time that all of this was happening, the European Union gave the IEBC 5 million euros. That's about 576 million shillings for this registration exercise. The money was supposed to be, is supposed to be for voter registration and preparations ahead of 2017. Now, this is interesting because in relation to some of the work that the West does in Kenya, the president had this to say. He said that the Western nations must respect this country and stop interfering in our internal matters. Now, surely voter registration is at the very core of the democratic process that then begins towards having a free and fair election and having the will of the people heard and determined. So this is all well and good what the president said, but there should be a modicum of shame in this country when the EU has to be the one that provides money for the basic tenet of democracy. That is the voter registration exercise. Now, lest we also forget, how many of you Kenyans watching here tonight understand that the IEBC voter registration exercise is continuous and it happens at the constituency level? These are the figures that were given by the IEBC, talking about that continuous voter process. As of June 2015, this was a figure that was given by the IEBC. Just 106,601 had registered as voters in this country from March 2013 up to June 2015. So lest we forget, as Kenyans, this is a continuous process that must be done every single day, and it's being done at the constituency level, and that we do not have to wait for the mass voter registration exercise. Lest we forget, this is incumbent upon us as Kenyans to make sure that we turn out to register as voters and indeed to vote in 2017. Let's take a commercial break. You're watching Checkpoint. We'll be back with more.